All right, so hopefully it does leave an indelible mark. But what does it mean for civil society? Because those groups are using this first G20 summit on African soil taking place in Johannesburg to call for urgent action on global inequality, climate justice, and even fair economic reforms. They say G20 leaders must make decisions that reflect the needs of developing countries and communities that are hardest hit by poverty as well as environmental crises. Oxfam International Executive Director Amitabh Behar joins us now for a little bit more. Amitabh, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. It's been called the People's Summit. Let's just talk about about that name, what it signifies, and the contrast to, I suppose, the Leaders' Summit as we have it right now. Good morning to you.
Morning, and thank you for inviting me. And I really like the question from where you're starting. I think this is a moment of an extremely fragile multilateralism. And at this juncture, it's fairly clear that it is not the global mainstream leadership which comes up with the issues of people. And you see people, their aspirations, their anger coming onto the street. So at this juncture, it's very critical that people set the agenda. And this People's Summit is essentially about highlighting what people are going through, what their aspirations are, what are the narratives of anger, but most importantly, what are the solutions that they have.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been hearing from the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana of South Africa, saying that raising questions of our poverty and our struggles at this time is actually the wrong message to be sending out, saying that we can't solve our own issues. It diminishes the value of these international conferences that we host. But surely, as you just said, if the people are coming first, this is the people that need their message to be heard as well.
Absolutely, yes. And I would actually go one step further. And I would say that what we are seeing at this moment is a massive crisis of inequality. In fact, the Stiglitz Commission actually calls it the inequality emergency. And what we need to really understand that it is this economic system that's been created, which essentially means that all the wealth that's being created goes and sits at the top. And majority of the people continue to live in poverty and deprivation. As in, let me just give you a couple of numbers. In the last 1 decade, the billionaires have added $33 trillion to their kitty. We are sitting in Africa, and in Africa, you literally have 4 people, just 4, and all men, who have more wealth than 50% of the population of Africa. That's the level of inequality. So at the one end, you have billionaires becoming rich and richer. In fact, Oxfam estimates that within a decade, we'll have a trillionaire. And on the other hand, globally, there are around 750 million people who sleep hungry. If this is not the central question for global leaders, if this is not the central question for G20, then what else could really be the focus of a global summit?
What's the solution here, Amitabh?
Oh, there are very, very clear solutions. Let's first be very clear that inequality is not inevitable. Inequality is a political choice. Inequality is a reflection of massive policy failures. It is a reflection of the growing wealth and the growing power, concentration of power amongst these wealthy. So what we think is, and we are very happy, we want to applaud the government of South Africa for its leadership in setting up the Stiglitz Commission. And there are 2-3 very tangible ways of addressing this crisis of inequality. The first is about taxing the super rich. We need to, and this is a conversation that started in G20 Brazil, and it has continued. And there's pretty much across now, there's gaining traction around the idea of taxing the super rich. The second, I think we'll need to also understand the debt crisis. We will need to get out of this debt crisis. The G20 offer on debt has not worked. You're seeing more and more countries actually getting into a debt trap. So that question needs to be addressed front and center. And the third, which really works, is the idea of investing. Once you tax the super rich, you have more resources. Those resources need to be invested in essential public services like public health, public education. These have been the fundamental drivers of an equal society.
The last three G20s have been led by India, Brazil, South Africa. These are nations who perhaps would have some sort of say, would agree with the commentary around the global south and have similar thoughts when it comes to civil society and the needs thereof. Next year, it goes to the United States. Do you think this conversation begins to lose momentum?
I think this is really important moment for the global leadership to continue on the right track. I think this is a group of G20, you have the Africa Union, and these are central questions at this juncture. And I really hope that the global leadership continues on the right course. Yes, at the moment we have seen the Trump administration take several measures which do not go well towards multilateralism. They have had clear policies which are favoring the super rich. But this is a moment for the global leadership for stages like the G20, the way we are seeing the setting of agenda in Johannesburg is taken forward. For instance, I would be really keen again be to applaud the South African government, the Stiglitz Commission. They've come up with the idea of the Intergovernmental Panel on Inequality, the way you have the Intergovernmental Panel on climate change. So the idea of maybe institutionalizing this panel, which is essentially going to be bringing in systematic research and data for governments to take intelligent decisions, the right decisions which reflect on the realities of people.
I think very importantly so, trying to make this a permanent feature might be the only way to get the conversation continuing to roll on. Now, debt relief has been a big demand for this G20. What are the most urgent reforms you think need to be altered in global lending practices, particularly to, shall we say, lower income regions?
I think, again, sometimes how we frame the conversations are really important. So what you're essentially seeing is not a crisis of debt. It's important to understand what it does. Becomes a crisis of public services. It essentially becomes a choice that the governments need to make between debt servicing and having more doctors, more teachers, more nurses at the local level. So, I really feel that we need to understand that this is defaulting on development. This is on defaulting on fighting inequalities, fighting poverty. So this needs a complete rehaul, and we must be looking at debt cancellation. There has to be the offer at the moment from G20 is inadequate. And if we don't address this question, and there are larger questions also of how the global financial architecture works, what is the cost of borrowing, I think all those questions need to be brought to the center stage, should be part of the agenda, and we need to ensure that it is not the common people who need to make this choice, that whether their country ends up just getting trapped in debt reservicing or it provides more daycare to the children of that country.
I mean, in fact, South Africa would have led that conversation, wanting to put it forward. I mean, I just remember a few years ago when President Cyril Ramaphosa gave a scathing attack to the leading nations, the more affluent nations, shall we say, in France. And he was really belligerent about how firm he was.
I think processes like G20 are dynamic processes. And at this moment, what I'm seeing within the G20 is the coalition of willing. As you talked of the Global South agenda getting articulated, the people's agenda getting articulated, it is getting traction. I would just also want to say that this is a moment where we cannot see these global processes in isolation. While we're sitting here in Johannesburg around G20, there's a UN tax convention happening right now in Nairobi. So we'll need to really look at these different conversations together. And I do see that the progressive agenda, while seemed on the back foot when we started this year, is gaining traction. And I really hope that we are able to defend the progress made from the G20 Brazil, where it started, and we are able to push forward the agenda of people.
Do you think the goals of the G20 are a little bit too lofty? We're asking for too much from a group of 20 nations, and I suppose other leaders as well, of course, who are significantly part of this. And should we maybe be following on to the bare minimum at this stage and build on that? Or should we be rather aiming for those lofty goals and achieving those? Because it is possible.
I would just go back to what I said. If there are 750 million people in the world sleeping hungry, if you're seeing a climate crisis, I was recently in Brazil for the COP, and we had a climate activist with us from the Pacific Islands. And she was saying that the playground where she played just 10 years ago is submerged. Those island nations are going to disappear. You have almost $13 trillion of unpaid care work annually, which doesn't get counted in the GDP. I think this is a massive crisis of humanity. And when people say it's a polycrisis, the polycrisis of fuel, of food, of climate, I would really argue that what we are looking at is essentially an economic crisis, the economic system that we have created, which then leads to the climate crisis. If you look at an Oxfam report, we've recently come up with a report called The Climate Plunder, in which you will see that it's the top richest 1% who are responsible for twice the emissions of the bottom 50%. And mind you, these top richest 1% also have their investments in essentially polluting industry. So it's not just about their lifestyle, it's also about where they make those investments. So if the global leadership doesn't address these really fundamental questions, then what we are seeing is complete breakdown of social and political stability. And you're seeing that anger actually spill out to the streets. I come from India. I've seen in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, just around my country, 3 countries where you have seen the Gen Z citizens' spontaneous movements pretty much changing regimes. And the political message should be loud and clear to the global leadership.
Amitabh, I think
people are not going to accept injustice and inequality.
100%. And you're actually seeing it right here in South Africa too. So an important conversation, an important civil society and organizations making their voices heard in this G20. Amitabh Behar, thank you so much for the time. Executive Director at Oxfam International, as we get more into the weeds of the G20 happening this weekend.